Welcome, Matrix members. Public speaking is a genuine fear for many people. Quarantining during our pandemic left us feeling a loss of words when faced with an opportunity to speak in front of another human being. If you get heart flutters at the thought of speaking to a group of people, our guest, Brenden Kumarasamy, has actionable tips for us during our talk today. Many of us cringe at the thought of talking in front of a crowd of people. We've often heard the phrases, be yourself, or get up on stage, or better imagine everyone in their underpants. But during my personal journey, I've never found this advice useful. Brenden Kumarasamy, our guest today, is the founder of the YouTube channel MasterTalk. Brenden is a communication coach, and he is dedicated to teaching his community how to master public speaking with confidence and clarity. After this episode, you will be equipped with the resources you need to begin your journey mastering communication. Welcome to the Organic Matrix, Brenden.
Samantha, the pleasure is absolutely mine. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to have you as a guest. Your YouTube channel has brought so much value to those around you. Can you tell us what inspired you to educate others on the art of communication?
Yeah, for sure, Samantha. Happy to. So it all started when I was in college. I went to business school, and I did these things called case competitions. Think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So while other guys my age are playing rugby or football or some other sport you probably wouldn't see me playing, I did presentations competitively, and that's how I learned how to speak. But then as I got older, I started coaching people who were younger than me, not really for money or anything, Samantha. I was just helping them win these competitions. And that's what helped me gain the expertise to start MasterTalk, because I realized, to your point, a lot of the advice out there sucks. It's like, picture them in their underwear. I was like, what if they're attractive? What do you do? Like, you just stare at them all day and then get arrested? I don't get it. So I started making videos in my mom's basement, and then a few years later, it just turned into something I never could have imagined.
That's wonderful. I love that. It's inspiring, honestly, that I think it started the best way because it came from a good place. Did you think that because you had a passion for it, that it contributed to your success?
Definitely. I definitely do think that's Samantha. Because to your point, I was just making fun of these videos. Like, even I thought these videos stunk. Like, I was just making them every week. And people don't have to take my word for it. Go watch my first videos. It's literally just me in my mom's basement on a couch, and I'm just speaking out ideas. And the reason I didn't feel forced to make it a business was because I had a great job at IBM. And that's what helped me, pay for all of my production when I started professionalizing the channel later. But it was probably years later after I'd started the channel, that I realized people pay for coaching. And I was like, oh, you could actually build a business around this. I could do this full time. So yeah, absolutely.
That's amazing. What makes communication an art?
Beautiful question. What makes communication an art? Let's start with the basic principle, which is the biggest mistake a lot of us make with communication is we see it as a chore. Whenever we think of communication, we think of anxiety, stress, nerves. Whereas for me, Samantha, the question has always been, how would your life change if you're an exceptional communicator? Why don't we dream about our communication skills? We dream about the expensive things we want to buy, the vacations we want to go on. So when we apply it to that frame, communication becomes an art, in my opinion, because the answer to that question, how would your life change if you were an exceptional communicator, is different for all of us. You might want to be a great communicator to be a better podcaster, even if you're already pretty amazing. Somebody else might say, hey, I want to be a great communicator so I can be a better mother for my children or a better father for my kids. Somebody else might say, I want to travel, I want to make new friends. Or in my case, build a bigger YouTube channel and share my ideas with the world. But because communication has a different answer for all of us, that is the cool thing. And that's why I consider it an art, because the reason we're all mastering it is different.
I love that. And I could totally understand how you could pair it up that way, because it's so malleable, and that is art.
Absolutely.
What is the importance of learning communication skills?
Absolutely. So the way that I think about this is, a lot of us think that communication is about getting our next job promotion, doing well at work, getting the next sale in our businesses. And I think that's just part of the picture. I would say the bigger piece, Samantha, is that communication leads to a more fulfilling life. It's the way that we talk to our families. It's the way that we order food at a restaurant and make the waiter feel like they're not having a shitty day because all their customers probably suck. And it's also traveling and making new friends. It's about the quality of our life. And once we realize that effective communication is about leading a quality life, that is when we start to take it more seriously. And that's why I think it's so important, because it affects every moment of every day of what we do.
Amen. That's a big picture. What's the biggest challenge with communicating with our peers, in your opinion, from what you've observed with your students?
Yeah, for sure. I would say communication with peers specifically, the biggest mistake I see is the idea of questions versus statements. So I'll give you an example. Most of us, when we communicate, it's usually a ping pong of statements. Example, I believe this. Well, I believe this. Well, I believe this. And I believe, and it's like a continuous friction of statements. People are just throwing statements at each other. Whereas what the best communicators on the planet do is that whenever they're asked a statement or somebody says a statement, I believe this, they generally reply with, why do you believe that? Why is that important for you? Why is that top of mind for you? So when they reply with questions, the quality of the communication improves because it leads to nuances in the conversation that wouldn't have existed before. And it also makes you more interesting as a person, because Dale Carnegie always says it's more important to be interested in other people than to be interesting yourself. And the magic of this is it's not that hard. If you audit the number of questions versus statements that we ask, a lot of the times the answer is usually 0, 1, or 2. So the key is just to increase that number, and that will automatically improve that area of life.
I love that you mentioned Dale Carnegie. I love his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, because you're right. It's kind of an etiquette too, right? Like and also knowing the intention of conversation. Like, to bring back what you said about it's better to be interested than interesting. If we think about it, like, objectively, who are the people that we love to be around the most? The people we feel like we can have full expression, and that they care, and that they're considerate to our existence and reality. And that's where we would be the most loyal. And that's where things don't feel like a chore, because you can be authentic. So I love that you said that, because we have these desires, and it's so interesting when we have wants. We have our ego's way of conceptualizing how we can achieve those wants, and usually that's like, oh, I really want this person's attention, let me be interesting. But then there's the reality of the situation, and that's when we like think with our heart and use empathy and be like, if I were this person, how would I like to be treated to get this certain reaction? And that's where the power really comes in, because it's like we have to create the environment for what we want to build in this conversation or relationship. And that happens with the absence of ego, would you say?
Absolutely. I mean, I love your share, Samantha. I completely agree. It's the idea that the more we take care of the people around us, the more that we understand their wants and needs at a deeper level than most, the more you gain their loyalty, because you show care that most people don't. And just doing a little bit of that already puts you ahead of most people. That's what I think is interesting. A lot of people say go the extra mile for people. I always say go the extra meter, because most people aren't even willing to run the extra meter. So if you do that, and then you run marathons for the people that really pour into you, that's the best way strategically, I would say, and energetically, more importantly, to pour into the right people and to give them the happiness that they deserve, and then for you as well to get that as well.
Yes. Why do you think many people struggle with public speaking?
I think the reason, Samantha, is because we grew up believing that communication is a chore. Here's what I mean by this. Where do we learn how to speak formally? The answer is school. Right? High school, elementary school, regardless of where you are in the world. But the problem, Samantha, is all of those presentations have 3 things in common. Number 1, they're all mandatory. We don't wake up one morning and say, hey, Samantha, you want to get breakfast and present all day? Says nobody ever. So that's 1. Number 2 is all of those presentations are different. It's never one presentation that you spend 3 years building. It's always 8 presentations per semester, and the topics suck. It's never, hey, what are you passionate about, Samantha? The removing of the ego, starting a podcast, the world, space. Like, no, you got to talk about Shakespearean poetry. Then after, you got to talk about the history of Missouri. And then you're like, do I even live in Missouri? Like, what? It's just a bunch of these random topics that we really don't care about, frankly. And then number 3 is the worst. Every presentation is tied to a punishment. So if you don't do a great job, you get punished for it. You lose 20 to 25% of your grade. You don't get a pat on the back, you get a slap in the face. So what's the point? The key conclusion here is that all of the presentations that we grew up doing as kids are mandatory, different, and punishable, which means we grow up believing that communication is a chore and nobody wants to get better at doing the dishes.
You're right. We got conditioned.
Absolutely.
How can we take steps to rewrite these behaviors?
That's the right question to ask. Absolutely. So the first part to that is the whole how would your life change if you're an exceptional communicator? I feel that empowering question is one a lot of people don't think about in the context of communication. We might get excited about the next TV show, about a new skill we want to learn, about a vacation we want to go on. We don't really get excited about our comms. So I would start there. And then the other piece is what to do tactically, which I call my easy 3. So I'll pause after each one so I don't monologue for 15 minutes here. So the first one is called the random word exercise, Samantha. So all you have to do is pick a random word, like tissue box, like trophy, like award, like talk, and give random presentations out of thin air. The reason why this exercise is so effective is if you can make sense out of nonsense, you could make sense out of anything. And that's the magic of the random word. So I always recommend for people who are listening, we all shower every day, so you got 10 minutes in there to do the random word exercise, or 30, depending on how long you shower for. The second piece is you can do this with your kids. For those of you who have children listening to this, I always recommend my clients do this like in a car when they're picking up their kids from school instead of listening to music, and just doing it 3-5 times a day. So that's number 1. Oh, you want me to keep going? Oh, okay, cool.
Yes, please.
I just wanted to give you an opportunity to say anything. Okay, cool. So number 2 is called the question drill. We get asked questions all the time in our life, Samantha, right? On a podcast, on a show, at work, at school. But a lot of us are reactive to those questions. We're not proactive. So, example, a few years ago when I started podcasting, I sucked. I remember somebody asked me the funniest question. He was like, "Where does the fear of communication come from?" And I looked at the guy and I said, "I don't know, man. San Diego, London? You tell me." Like, I wasn't ready for the question, so I got caught off guard. So instead, what I did is every day for 5 minutes, I would answer just one question that I thought somebody was going to ask me about communication. So, for example, 1 would be, where does the fear of communication come from? 2 would be, what tips do you have for introverts? And I just did that every single day until I had an answer for everything. And it's funny, you actually asked me a question that I'd never gotten yet, which is in what way communication is an art, which is fascinating. But the point is the question drill is something we can all do. So every day for 5 minutes, that's all I ask you all to do. Think of one question and answer it. If you do that for a year, you'll have answered 365 questions about your industry and you'll be bulletproof. So that's number 2. And then finally, number 3 is so simple that nobody does it. Make a list of the 10 people you love the most in your life, your friends, your family, your clients, your colleagues, and ask yourself a simple question. When was the last time you sent them not a 20-minute, but a 20-second video message to just say, "Hey, I really appreciate having you in my life. I'm super grateful for you." Just do that and you'll watch the world change in front of you.
I love that. And I bet that's gonna make a lot of people's days.
It does. There's this one woman who interviewed me. It was a few months ago. Her name is Christina. And I told her about this exercise on a podcast like this, and she sent video messages to her grandparents because she never sees them, and it made their day because they never hear her voice. They haven't seen her in months, and it only took her a minute to do that.
I love that advice. And I would also like to see if you can show us how you would play the random word game.
I'm more than happy to, Samantha. Throw any word my way.
Socks.
Awesome. So for those who are listening to this podcast, Samantha did not give me the word socks, and I have to create a random presentation at dinner, which I'm going to do right now. As I prepare for my day every single morning, I have to put a couple of things on, my shirt, my pants. But even when I'm indoors, I'm always wearing my socks. And the reason is because they make me feel comfortable. There's no dirt on my feet when I'm walking around in my house, but they also make me feel a little bit more relaxed. Relieves a little bit of anxiety from my life. Life is kind of like socks in some way, shape, or form, Samantha. A lot of us are always looking for the Louis Vuitton jacket. We're always looking for the $300 hat, the $500 Jordans, the expensive things to show our status for other people, but we forget about the most important thing, the small things, the $10 socks that nobody cares about, but that makes your life easier. Imagine if it was winter and you didn't have socks on and you accidentally put your feet, your boots, into the snow. Yeah, you probably would have wished you had a couple of socks there. I encourage all of you to not just think about the jackets in your life, the hats, the toques, the things that everyone else sees, but the small things that really matter and can make your life just a little bit happier. There you go, socks.
I love it. Your presentation reminded me of the pen. Like, sell me this pen. And what I imagine in my head is like instead of like someone doing a speech, like because you spoke about all of, like you brought a visual experience, a visceral experience, an emotional experience, and made us really realize the small things, the $10 socks that we take for granted. And it reminded me of like when you sell the pen, it's like many people would say, well, it's a great pen and it has a great feel. But in reality, it's like, can you give me your autograph? Oh, you don't have a pen. Here you go. Like, doing it, like because you made it practical. I love it. I love it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And what I want to emphasize with everyone listening to this, the goal is not to do it well, the goal is to do it a lot. Because a
Mm,
lot of people ask me, like, what's my secret behind Brenda, how did you do this? The secret is I did it 3,000 times.
mhm.
And I'm not exaggerating that number. So if you just do it 5 times a day, like what I just did, took 60 seconds. But when you start, Samantha, it's going to sound like this. Socks is should I show Samantha my socks? Socks like you're like confused and you don't know. But if you do this 5 times a day for a year, get this, you'll have done the exercise 1,800 times. Is that wild?
Yeah.
5 minutes a day for a year? That's really the magic.
And I love that because something that I'm not the only one that struggles with is the idea that we want to like okay, so it's like a trap, right? We want to respond and be witty and like have wise responses for the people we speak to. But sometimes that could be such a disrupting goal that it could block us from truly listening to the other person. And we're already creating like a narrative from an assumption that maybe is could be off topic because we didn't hear the whole story before we were like coming up with a response. Doing this exercise can really support people who struggle with responding right away or like reading these pauses because you'll be able to put together an articulate thought on the spot. And yeah, learning how instead of feeling like, oh, uh, I love
Literally 1000%. You're absolutely right, Samantha. It's not just in the context of presentations, it's in the context of life. Because if you can think on your feet, that's why I always say communication is a multiplier effect.
mm,
When one domino falls, all the other dominoes start to fall with it. Where, oh, wait a second, if I can do the random word exercise in presentations, you'll do it in conversations too. Like I'm doing right now. Like when you asked me the art question, I was like, huh, how do I answer this one? And I figured out an answer. So there you go.
how can we present our ideas confidently in a group setting?
Absolutely. So this is a strategy I teach called puzzle. So communication in many ways, Samantha, is like a jigsaw puzzle. You know those toy puzzles you used to as kids, those little things we put together?
Mm.
So if I asked you, it's a simple question, don't worry. Nothing too hard. If you're working on this puzzle, which pieces would you start with first and why?
The border so that it can give me a foundation.
Exactly, easy question,
No.
right? And the other piece I would add to your point is they're also easier to find in the box
Mm.
because they got those little edge pieces to them. So why am I bringing up puzzles? The reason I bring them up is a lot of us do the opposite in communication, unfortunately, which is we start with the middle. We shove a bunch of stuff in our presentations. We get to the presentation and it sounds like this. We blabber throughout the whole thing. And then the last slide, we go, yeah, so thanks. That's what 99% of people do. It's wild. And it's so easy to fix. All you have to do is present and practice your presentations like a jigsaw puzzle. Start with the edges first. Do the introduction 50 times. Just the introduction. 50 seems like a wild number. Oh my God, Brendan's making us do this 50 times. The introduction's like 60, 90 seconds, people. Like this takes an hour. Okay, max.
That's true.
Right? It only takes 6 seconds. So you're done after an hour. Same thing with the conclusion. What's a great movie with a terrible ending? Last time I checked, terrible movie. Then do the conclusion 50 times, then tackle the middle. And a great example is actually you, Samantha. I'm sure when you started this podcast and you started introducing guests, you're probably like, I don't really know how to do this. But now you got like a whole script. It's really nice. And you're like, I'm scared of communication, all this stuff. So that takes time because you did, in many ways, you applied the jigsaw puzzle analogy without knowing the analogy because you started with the start, and you're like, let me get this right. But you're really good at it now because you've done it 20, 30, X number of times, probably even more at this point. So that's really the advice for all of us is to apply that.
Thank you, and I appreciate the compliment too, because it's true. I definitely needed MasterTalk sooner, and I'm glad I met you because I saw some of your videos on YouTube, and the first like 2 minutes, I was already learning new techniques and different ways of looking at communication, and I was like, "This guy is a real professional. I love it. I love what you're doing."
We try, son. I appreciate it.
What advice can you offer to how we can communicate if we're introverted?
Absolutely. So I'd always say to my introverts, because that's most of the people I've worked with in my career, what surprised me the most is that introverts are actually way better at communication than extroverts. They just don't know why. So there's three strengths that introverts have in communication. Number one is listening. If you're an introvert, it implies that you speak less on average, which means you'll listen more on average. I sucked at listening for many years, and I'm still a work in progress here because I'm an extrovert. That's why I like being a guest. I like talking a lot, right? So whenever I'm speaking, I don't listen as effectively as an introvert can, which means the introvert Samantha can adapt the message a lot faster to the audience and is a lot more empathetic to the audience too. So that's number one. Number two is pausing. Pausing is the most important skill in communication. To take a beat, to draw emphasis to a core piece of your message. Let me tell you, extroverts struggle with this. And the reason is because whenever they're at a bar, they're at a party, and there's just space, they immediately want to fill it up. What's your favorite color, Samantha? So just they're always trying to fill up the space, which is I'm guilty as charged here.
I'm guilty too.
Oh, there you go. Okay, please. There you go. Introvert doesn't have that problem. They're super comfortable with silence because once again they speak less on average, so they can just stare at you at a bar and just keep looking at you and not say anything, which means in presentations they're very comfortable pausing. So you tell them to pause for 2 seconds, they go, okay, oh, does that make me a better presenter? And they just do it. So it's easy for them. That's number two. Number three is one that I don't think anybody knows. Number three is introverts are actually more accessible, Samantha, to a wider group of people. Example, Gary Vaynerchuk. Gary V is the CEO of VaynerMedia, has a massive social media following and brand, and I'm a big fan of his work. That's why I use him in my podcast example, because I know he wouldn't mind. He's an extrovert. You either like the guy or you don't. Nobody's in the middle with Gary V. You either go, oh my God, he's the best, or you go, I hate this guy. And that's the consequence of being an extrovert. Once again, all respect to him. But Brene Brown, you cannot, Samantha, let me repeat this again. You cannot say, I hate Brene Brown. Because if you say that, the FBI, the CIA, and the SWAT team will be at your house and arrest you. Right? That's how illegal it is in our society to hate on introverts. I've yet to meet. By the way, I love Brene Brown. I love her work. But the point that I want to drive is when you're more introverted, you can actually reach a wider group of people. So what's the conclusion? The
Mm.
conclusion is triple down on your strengths.
I love that. What can you I think I can guess what you would advise an extrovert that has the tendency of overstimulating their audience. Um, but I do wanna ask that question just to clarify for the extroverts out there, we're not forgetting about you. It seems like Brendan and I are extroverts, but I've recently, podcasting, learned how t I always admired introverts for the same exact qualities that you mentioned. I've always felt heard, listened, understood, never judged. And, seeing that I was such an extrovert, I was kinda like I love to see myself as the entertainer, like, putting on a show, see if I can make my introverted friends laugh out loud. Um, so what kind of advice can you advise someone who they get so excited that they have to fill up the silence and they have those kind of tendencies? What kind of advice can help them, like, kinda slow down, take that pause?
Absolutely, Samantha. So here's the advice. The advice is, I would say the principle is learn from the other. So whenever I coach introverts, because those three things I mentioned, they'll pick it up really quickly. So the key is that the master communicator can do what both introverts and extroverts are good at.
Mm,
Right. So let me go through the three strengths. I won't spend too much time on this, but the three strengths with extroverts is they're willing to take more risk. So even if the joke isn't funny, they'll still say the joke.
mm,
That's one. Number two is vocal projection. Because they talk a lot more, their vocal range is wider than introverts. So, for example, that's why my vocal range is really wide because I karaoke in 8 different languages. I go clubbing. I record with my family. Like it's just I'm as extrovert as they come, and I guest on like the podcasts, right? So I'm always talking and making videos. So because of that, the vocal range. And the third advantage that extroverts are the main ones, anyways, is eye contact. They're really good at just staring into people's eyes for really long periods of time. Introverts have really hard time with that. So what's the point here? The point is you got to learn from each other. So if you're an introvert, learn more from the extrovert. Work on your vocal projection. Work on the joke that you don't want to tell. But if you're an extrovert, you already do those things really well. So do what the introvert is doing. So the key is really to be the mesh of both. That's why I really took it to myself to learn what introverts do well, so I could do it well too.
and we can adapt to being ambiverts. We're almost, like, towards the end, but this is, like, the most fun and also the most, like, nutrient, thought food dense conversations I've had, and I can't believe how fast it's going, but it really goes to show that you put your training into practice because all I see is clear, concise, and, like, easy to understand content with your speech, and I think that's why it's like, I feel like time's going slower, but I can't believe how fast it's going. I love that.
I appreciate that, Samantha. The point that I want to drive here. Look, let's go to the most important tip while we're at it. The most important tip, Samantha, is so simple. The best way to speak is to speak. So let me tell you the biggest mistake everyone who's listening to this podcast is making right now, which is the following. Oh, Samantha, you brought on such a cool guest, this Brenden guy. You talked about the random word exit. Then he demonstrated, my God. Then he did the video messages. He talked about the question drills. But the problem is that most people aren't going to do any of those exercises. That's the problem. So if you want to win, the goal is not to be Samantha or Brenden. The goal is, are you booking 15 minutes, not 15 hours, 15 minutes tomorrow to do all three of those exercises? That's how you get the result. The reason I'm so crisp on a podcast is because I've done 600 of them. I've
Mhm.
been asked the same question over and over and over again. And that's okay because people aren't supposed to ask me my favorite colors. That's okay because nobody gives a shit about my favorite color. They want to ask me questions on communication. So it's our duty as people who share ideas with the world to get so good at answering those same questions that people don't need to ask a follow up question on it because it's so clear.
That's so true. I read in a book, I think by Deepak Chopra. I think it's, The Way of the Wizard, one of my favorite books. Have you read it?
No, but I'd love to learn more.
It's a great book. It's like taking the stories from Merlin the Wizard and the time of, King Arthur and his, like, upbringing, how he was raised by Merlin and, like, principles of his childhood that Merlin taught him. And one of the first lessons is you know you're a master at something when you can tell the whole story in one sentence.
Oh,
Mm,
very cool. I
yeah.
learned something new today. I always learn something from the host, and that's the lesson.
So, what inspired you to begin MasterTalk?
Absolutely. So there's kind of two parts to that question, Samantha. There is, what inspired me to begin and what inspires me to continue. So what inspired me to begin wasn't that much. I was a 22-year-old kid when I started MasterTalk. I just had an idea for it because the people I was coaching for those years kind of wanted me to make the videos in some way. Because future students I wasn't able to coach because I had to focus on my corporate life that I'd spent years getting. So that's what began the inspiration. I didn't think people were going to listen to it. I mean, think about it. Who's going to watch public speaking YouTube videos? I never thought anyone would. But I knew those 5 people would. So I started making those videos. Today, though, I would say the vision has evolved a lot, quite a bit. So I'm happy to share the story behind it. So the story is about a TikTok that I watched a few months ago. So I'm watching this TikTok, right, Samantha? And the TikTok is about Taylor Swift. She wins an award called Woman of the Year that a company called Billboard gives out. It's a music company. And it's 2014. So she wins this award. She gets up on a stage and she says, "Your future Woman of the Year is 11 years old right now. She's sitting in a choir, she's playing piano, and she has big dreams to be a star. And we need to take care of her." And then what happens is the TikTok flips to like 5, 7 years later. And Billie Eilish becomes the youngest inductee in Billboard's history to win Winner of the Year, like 17 or something. And she's like a kid, right? She's barely a woman. So she gets up on the stage. She's got her big, bulky jacket. She's got her big glasses. And she sounds something like this: "Yo, what's up, guys? I can't believe I won this award. I don't know how this happened. And Taylor's so amazing." And she keeps just blabbering. And then the last 30 seconds of her speech completely changed my life. She looks at the crowd and goes, "Yeah, like when it was 2014, I was watching Taylor Swift's speech, and I was 11 years old. And I was learning how to sing, and I was in choir, and you all took care of me. So thank you, Billboard." She walks off stage. And the reason that story forever changed my life, Samantha, is I thought about the next Elon Musk. Because when Elon was a 13-year-old kid in South Africa, nobody cared about him. Nobody sat him down for 45 minutes and said, "Hey, kid, you're going to be a big star someday. You should probably learn how to speak. It'll make your life easier." And nobody did that for Elon. So I thought about the next Elon Musk, who's probably an 11-year-old girl in Cambodia. And I thought to myself, am I the only human being on Earth right now who's trying to create free communication resources for that girl or for that boy, whoever it is? And I realized I was. So I took it a lot more seriously and I quit my job.
I love it. That's the best. You were chosen for that. Like, that's definitely a higher calling because, you know, I think that's the pinnacle of self-actualization.
That's way too much credit, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, the thing is, you've dedicated your attention and your expertise to helping people from all over the world. Like, all over the world. You're giving when we think about 100 years ago when, it was illegal for people of color to go to school, you know, like 100 years ago. You think about people in this present day and across like third world countries that don't have the resources, but they want to learn English. They want to learn how to speak. They want to change their generational circumstances. And you enable them to have a chance to become an expert, to express their intelligence, and that's worth the world's weight in gold because we could be a genius, but if we don't know how to express our mind and our being, nobody will know. And if nobody knows, it's like if Einstein never gave us the E equals MC squared because of the ethics behind it, he wouldn't have been such a profound educator and scientist in all other areas in his life, because all publicity is good publicity in some ways, because sometimes we have to make sacrifices to get the attention. But yeah, that's why I think it's really important what you're doing, because you're right, like to be that considerate to people that you don't know is why I think that's the pinnacle of self-actualization, because a lot of people are just doing things they don't care about, but you're over here trying to help somebody you don't know.
Oh, I appreciate that, Samantha. And that's very kind. I think I learned a lot from your share around, That's really actually really important what you mentioned, because I didn't think about it myself. Is the whole idea that people of color could even go to school 100 years ago? That's so true.
Mhm.
It's really wild to think about that. And the other piece though that's important to add is anyone can do this. And what I mean by do this, I don't mean being a communication coach or being a professional football player. I mean do them at a level that can reach and help other people. There's this great quote by Pope Francis, by one of my heroes, Scott Harrison. He talks a lot about this. He's the CEO of Charity Water. And what he said, he said the quote essentially, which is this: all it takes in the world is for one person to have hope, right? All it takes to create hope in the world is one person. And why can't that person just be you?
Mhm.
And when you focus on that and you realize that, like, I never thought like it would turn into this whole Elon Musk story. I was just a kid. I still live in my mother's basement, even if I do much better than I used to. But it was just a small idea that we just keep building on. So what I would encourage everyone who's listening to this is to start with those little steps and then build it up over time, and you never know what it's going to turn into.
Amen. Amen. Brenden, time for some rapid fire. Oh, before we do the rapid fire, I want to challenge our listeners to record themselves doing the 3 exercises Brenden mentioned and to tag us in social media or send it to us in our DMs if you don't want to post it. But we want to help you stay accountable. So feel free to reach out to us and tag us.
I love that. That's an awesome challenge.
Thank you. Because when you mentioned it, like some people might not do it. I was like, he's right. So let's be the ignition here. So rapid fire. How would your parents describe what you do?
That is the right question to ask me. My mom has no idea what I do. When I worked at PwC, that was my first job as an accountant. She just looked at people and says, "Yeah, he does numbers." And then when I worked at IBM, she would tell all of her friends, "My son works at IBM," in her Indian accent. And she has no idea what I'm doing at IBM either. And now this, my goodness, I think she just goes communication, communication. She doesn't speak English well, but she's my biggest fan. She watches all my videos, but she doesn't understand them.
That's awesome. Oh, I love that. What do you think the world will look like in the next 50 years?
That's a powerful question. That's a good one, Samantha.
Thank you.
I'd love to get your answer to this question too, but I would say for me, she's like, oh, I would say for me, here's what I hope. I hope that in 50 years, towards the end of my life, I can say, at least in the context of my work, that I don't have to worry about the next Elon Musk anymore. That my information is systematized in a way that lives beyond me. Like the problem with Dale Carnegie is not Dale himself. It was the time period that he was born in, because he died in like 1920. So there wasn't like a podcast like this. You actually there's no recording of him actually speaking, which really sucks. Whereas what I attempt 100 years later, because I was born in the right time period of history, is that people can just watch my YouTube videos forever, right? All this stuff can live forever. These podcasts, this can live forever, all of it. So that's my hope for the work that I do, for the world in general. I hope we move towards a higher level of consciousness, not a lower one. I think that's the easiest way to explain it, is that if all of us just became more self-aware, more giving, more generous, that's the hope. And maybe go to Mars. That'd be cool. Let's see what happens.
Yes, I love that. I hope that we end up terraforming and get the Dyson sphere around the Earth.
What does that even mean? Is it
The
like a
Dyson sphere is like the idea of putting a bunch of solar panels, probably surrounding another planet so it doesn't burn up ours. But like, let's say we send off a bunch of satellites with solar panels to like Venus or somewhere closer to the sun, and the sun charges it up, and it just kind of floats around this other planet and gives us free energy from the sun, so that we're not using resources on Earth to get energy. And
that's
with that,
cool.
once we get that kind of power resource, we'll be able to travel further out into the galaxy, because we'll be able to put Dyson spheres on other planets where our spaceships can like refuel, recharge, and have energy throughout the universe so that we can expand.
I'm learning so much just talking to you, Samantha. Amazing.
Thank you. And honestly, I like that you brought up that you hope you're born in the right time. That's one of the main reasons I started a podcast, because I was like, we have the opportunity to really make a time capsule for the future. Like, we look back at cuneiform tablets and say, oh, we have an idea of how life was in the past. We have an idea. Like, for all we know, we're reading these cuneiform tablets and the story could be fiction and we take it as history. Like, because we're not at that period. But at this time, people can actually hear our voice, see our personality, thousands of years into the future. Like, once it's in the internet, it's in the cloud. Like, we've reached eternal life in a way.
Absolutely, that's the way Gary Vee thinks about it, anyways. And that's my hope too. Let's see how far I get. I mean, let's see how far we get in our lifetime. I think that's the game.
I certainly believe in what you're doing, and I think it's definitely gonna last. And I would like to take your challenge in answering the 50-year question, because you're the first guest to flip it on me like that, and I like it. So the thing is, it's easy to say what we hope for. That's what I noticed with this question. So I'm gonna just try to be as objective as possible, because my fantasies are probably not aligned with most of the world. So I'm gonna go with what I think. I personally think that people are going to start realizing the impact of toxic living, similar to how we realized cigarettes is not a cure for anything. When they used to advertise it as like, you're nauseous, smoke cigarette. You got a headache, smoke cigarette. Like, so I think that now that, a lot of these companies that are making people sick are getting exposed, that only more and more people are going to be more aware of it. And I think in 50 years, the America's economy will be recreated, or at least being rebuilt from the ground up with solar energy production, reusable energy sources, and I also think that a lot of people are going to need communication coaches like you, because technology is going to give us the most dependent tendencies, and we're probably going to have a lot of social anxiety from being comfortable behind a screen. So that's what I think. What is one piece of advice you'd give someone starting out in your career?
Starting in my career, I would say this. Tony Robbins says the quality of your life is solely determined by the quality of the questions that you ask yourself. Here's my version of the quote. My version of the quote is, I dare everyone who's listening to this podcast to ask themselves one very difficult question about life every single day. Because if you did that for 30 days, you'll never be the same ever again. So I call these 80-20 questions. These are the questions that I believe create the most clarity in one's life. So I'll give you a couple. Question number one, I'll give 3 to keep life easy today. 1, if you had all the money in the world, how would you spend your time? If I made you an instant billionaire, what would you do with your time? Because a lot of us are optimizing for this magical number called 65, but we didn't pick that number. Somebody else picked that number for us. You should retire here. It's like, well, Steve Jobs died in his 50s. So I don't think that's the right number.
Yeah.
So that's 1. Number 2, another question to think about is, if you could only accomplish 3 things in your life, what would you want those 3 things to be and why? Only 3 things. This really helps you focus your mind on what actually matters for what you want to do in life. And then the third question is, what's a goal of a dream, or a dream that you secretly gave up on and never told anyone about? So start documenting that question, and you might go ahead and pursue something that you otherwise might have not without the question. So yeah, that's my advice.
These are all these amazing introspection gifts. I love all these tools. And thank you so much, Brenden. That is the last question that I have. And it's been an absolute enlightening honor to have you on our show. And I hope to stay in contact, because I want to see your journey. I'm going to be following you.
Absolutely, Samantha. You're amazing at interview. I loved your questions, and I love your radiance. Thanks so much for having me. This is great.
Thank you. To support Brenden and his mission to provide quality content for those wanting to improve their public speaking, follow him on social media and check out MasterTalk on YouTube. Brenden's social media links and YouTube channel will be in the description below. Communication can be scary, but with mentors like Brenden, you can begin to feel prepared. If you found value in our content, please tag us on social media on your insights. All feedback is welcomed and helps us serve our fellow Matrix members to stay up to date with our Matrix mentors and what we have in store for you. Bookmark our website and subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channel. It was great to have you on the Organic Matrix Show, and we'll love to see you on the next download.
There you go.